Okay, I think that hopefully a couple more people will still join us, but given the time, I think it would be good if we got going. So just quickly, I'll introduce myself. My name is Chris Bear, and I'm one of the directors of Woven. So welcome to today's webinar. It's great to have you all with us. This is the second of these webinars that we've organised, and we've really started them as a way to try to both ignite new conversations about the insect as food and feed sectors, but also to develop new networks around these sectors as well. And that speaks very much to Woven's central purpose, which is very much as a network organisation. And our focus is on the UK, but we're very keen to foster new international links. So the international nature of both our speaker and all the participants today is really encouraging. I think we've got people joining us from everywhere, from Italy to Chile, so that's really great. For today's webinar, it's a real pleasure to be joined by Professor Arnold van Huis, who is Professor of Tropical Entomology at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. I probably don't need to say very much to introduce him. I'm guessing that everyone is very aware of who he is. He's one of the most influential figures in the insect as food and feed sectors, especially through his lead role in the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's groundbreaking report on edible insects, and also through his ongoing editorship of the Journal of Insects as Food and Feed. I'll hand over to Arnold in a second, and he's going to introduce his work to us for about 10 minutes. And after that, we're going to turn to questions from participants. Excuse me. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and we'll probably kick off with those in terms of the question and answer session. And then we can use any remaining time for additional questions and wider discussion. So a few quick housekeeping points just before we actually get started. First, we are recording today's webinar. I hope that's okay with everyone. The intention is to make it available for members on the Woven website in the future. And make it part of the resource that we're able to offer people. Second, I think everyone's actually done this already, but could you just keep your microphones muted unless you're actually speaking, just to keep background noise to the minimum. And finally, if you do have questions that you'd like to make or points that you'd like to raise, could you initially just do that via the chat function using the button at the bottom of the Zoom panel? I'll keep an eye on the chat page and try and use that as the basis for moving around everyone later on and raise those questions where possible. Okay, I think that's everything I need to say at this stage. So thanks again to everyone for joining, and I'll hand straight over to Professor Arnold van Huis.
Yeah, I have a small PowerPoint which I just want to share with you. If I can put it on, I think I can. Okay. Well, just the webinar is called Ask the Expert. I always wonder what an expert is, because I always felt that there are no experts. We are all pupils learning. So anyway. Yeah, just a little bit about my career. I started in 1974 as an associate and afterwards as an expert for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And I worked in Nicaragua, and that was an integrated pest management of maize. I then went to the university, and based on that work in Nicaragua, I did my PhD. I wrote some other publications. Then I became a project leader in a project in Niger for 9 Sahelian countries. That was a training program. I will come back to that later. Then I was recruited by the Wageningen University, and I was mainly involved in biological control and integrated pest management as the tropical entomologist. And I worked in a number of countries. Also, I was a lot involved with the Food and Agriculture Organization on desert locust strategies, quite in the news lately. And I also was running a large interdisciplinary project in West Africa, Benin, Ghana, and Mali, and it was called Convergence of Sciences. From 2015 onwards, I'm emeritus professor, which means I still work for my department, but I only do now insects as food and feed. and I'm also the chief editor of a journal. And just to indicate to you why I became involved in edible insects. As I told you, from 82 till 85, I was working in Niger for those Sahelian countries. And I came back in 1995, and that was a sabbatical, which I had also in 2000, but I started in Niger. And I was interviewing people about, well, all cultural aspects of insects, insects in medicine, in witchcraft, insects as food, etc. But then I went to the Plant Protection Service, and then the guys told me that women are earning more money from collecting grasshoppers from the millet than by selling their millet. And I was so surprised. I said, how can I have been so stupid working from 82 till 85, 3 years in Niger, and nobody ever told me? Well, afterwards I understood, because people in the tropics will never tell you about their eating of insects, because they know that in the West it's considered a primitive habit. So anyway, that was an eye-opener for me. And since then, I became more and more interested in insects as food and feed. Now we have several projects. A lot of people point to Wageningen. Well, we got some projects last year. One is a very large project from the European Union, 8 million euros, which will be running up till 2003. I'm in the advisory board. And there are 18 industrial and 17 academic partners in this program. And that is almost anything related to insects as food and feed. And you see the number of countries that are involved, really a huge project. We also got a project that was by the Department of Virology, and that's called Insect Doctors. And one of the main issues, of course, is very often the problem of diseases in mass rearing of insects. So I think this is very welcome that we have now a project in which 15 PhD students will be educated in insect pathogens. That's a project of 2 and 3 million euros, more or less. Now there are more projects, and here is just a file. You find them, all the projects of Wageningen. What I also, we have a journal of Insects as Food and Feed, and this year we got a citation of 3.2, so we are extremely glad. And we get really an enormous amount of manuscripts lately, so that's going quite well. And just to show you that the last 10 years there has been a tremendous interest. If you use edible insects in the Web of Science, and I did that last week, you get from 1945 till 2010, 48 hits. If you do it from 2011 to 2020, you get 655. And half of that is 2019 and 2020. And the year is not even finished. So it's unbelievable. And the insect startups is more than 300 right now. And that's a website which by Bugburger in Sweden, who keep track of this. Now here you see also, if you use Web of Science, you use black soldier fly, you see also that going from 2016 to 2019, that we have an increase of about 6 times more articles. So it's really a tremendous increase. Now, if you ask me what are the challenges of the insects as food and feed, then, well, most people realize that it is about legislation. One of the major problems now is that we are not allowed to feed insects to poultry and to pigs, while in Canada, United States, it's allowed. And of course, that's an enormous market. So if that would be, well, IPIF was able to get it allowed in 2017 for aquafeed, that's already quite an achievement. But we hope in 1 or 2 years that it will also be allowed for poultry and for pigs. Then, of course, we have the novel food legislation, which is, well, this year we hope that some of those insects will be allowed in the whole of the European Union. Now, another challenge I feel are, well, nutritional benefits. We know it's very similar to meat, but the health benefits I think is quite important, both for animals as for humans. And there are an increasing number of publications which point to these health benefits. Probably it has a lot to do with the chitin of the insects, which triggers the immune system. I think another big issue is insects as food. I think it's not going that well, really. It's just a snack right now. And I think there are quite a number of studies on consumer strategies, but I think it's also product development, which is quite important. But if you ask me how that will go in future, I just don't know. It can be an exponential increase in that we are at the beginning, and you never know how it will go at a certain moment, especially if some of the TV cooks will start with insects. You never know how quick it will go. I think also an interesting development is that the insect products, that's more than food and feed. There are an increasing number of publications on using the leftovers as fertilizer. That seems to have crop protection effects and growth stimulating effects. Oils for cooking or cosmetics, I think, is quite interesting. Biolubricants, biodiesel, bioplastics, biomaterials. So these are developments other than just food and feed. Another interesting development, if you look at poultry or pigs, well, the common production animals, we have a history of about 70 years in genetics, so genetic improvement. And with insects, we are just starting. There are a few companies that are hooking up with genetic companies in order to improve certain strains, or to use strains, or to improve the existing strains. And another development which is happening, that's on insect welfare. Well, there are more publications, but people are really wondering right now. I worked in pest management for more than 30, 40 years. Nobody ever asked me a question about insect welfare. As soon as I was talking about insects as food, everybody start asking questions about insect welfare. So that's another development which is happening right now. I think I will leave it at this. Then I don't know whether I should go right away to the questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Arnold. That was a great introduction, and I think that the challenges are certainly things that we are all grappling with in one way or another at the moment. So thank you very much for kicking things off in that way. Yeah, we do have some excuse me, we do have some questions that were submitted in advance, which we can start working through. Just to say that if you weren't here right at the beginning, if you have questions that you'd like to ask that you didn't submit in advance, if you'd like to just start by raising those in the chat window initially, then we can come to those, and that's probably going to be the easiest way to manage this, although I'm not trying to mute everyone throughout, and it'd be great to hear other people's voices along the way as well. Arnold, do you want to essentially work through them in the order that they came in?
I think so, yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So we've got some from Carlotta, who I think is here, from the Alia insect farm in Italy, and asks some questions related to cricket farming. Are there differences in terms of nutrition profile between Akita and Sigillatus, and which is the best species in terms of protein content?
Yeah, these were very technical questions, so I had to look it up. And the first question was about the protein content. I checked it. They both have an equal amount of protein, so it's about Agetus domesticus and Gryllodus sigillatus. But they are more or less similar. They also have more or less similar fat content. So that's more or less the same. There was also a question about the cricket processing. What is the best technology to process crickets? Well, I'm not an expert in this at all. I know that, and the question was specifically if you would use spray drying or freeze drying. Of course, there are quite a number, I think about 10 different drying methods for insects. Well, what is the best? I would not know. What first has to be done anyway is decontamination. That can often be done by blanching, but decontamination is the first step, in fact, before you start drying. And well, freeze drying, of course, is quite expensive. People have to realize this. And I think spray drying, for example, would be much cheaper. But with freeze drying, you get a higher protein content and probably a lower fat content. So that is interesting. And also the process of drying may have an effect on the browning. With mealworms, it's very pronounced, very often the browning process of insects. And freeze drying does not prevent that browning. So that are things that has to be well sorted out, but I don't know exactly how that is with crickets. Defatting crickets may be important, especially for the sensory influence. The lipids apparently seem to have give quite an odor, and apparently not a pleasant odor. So that's why some people prefer to defat it first. And the best feed mix composition for crickets, well, I don't know really. It is always a trade-off between the performance of the insect and the substrate you are using for the insect. Of course, you want to use substrates which are cheap, because crickets are still quite expensive, I must say, in comparison to other products. So people are really trying to put them on substrates which are cheap, which can be, let's say, vegetables, for example, which are discarded for cosmetic reasons, or weeds. In certain countries, they use weeds to grow these insects, which are, of course, quite cheap. But for optimal growth, yeah, a lot of people use chicken feed, or anyway high quality feed stuff. But that's a matter of, well, costs as well. I don't know whether that answers your questions, more or less.
Yes, thank you, Professor. More or less, yes, we are aligned. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm not an expert in this, but okay, can I go to the next one then?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe if we move to the questions from Pablo Flores, because then the other two sets of questions we've got are maybe more regulation and policy focused. So if we maybe go to the Pablo Flores ones, I think
Pablo first, okay.
Yeah, and Pablo is the CEO of Bugs and Us, which is a Chilean startup that's farming insects. So yeah, if you'd like to go through those questions.
Yeah, that has to do with how do you evaluate a certain insect species, whether it's suitable for farming. Well, that's a very general question. And of course, the first thing is, where do you want to use the insect for? If it is for feed or for food, or and then it depends. If you take crickets, I think the crickets are less easy to farm than mealworms or black soldier fly, because you can use, in this case, a tray system. But automation is quite important in this. And what I understood, some of those farms like Entomophagy or maybe Aspire, they say they have robotized also in a certain way cricket farming. I'm not quite sure how that works, but anyway, it is important that you can automate the system to make it suitable. But another point is, of course, diseases. I think I wrote an editorial earlier this year about which cricket species and to farm. And there again, you have some diseases like the densovirus, which can really decimate your population. And you can then shift to another species, for example, Gelodes sigillatus, which don't have that problem with the densovirus. So that is then a kind of solution. Another way is maybe you can select for species that are more resistant to diseases. And then you have, of course, also the substrate. What kind of substrate do you want to use? What we just mentioned, people are really, because we are all talking about the circular economy, so people want to use as much as possible organic waste products. And can the insects thrive on those products? I think the price really of the insect products are still, to my opinion, too expensive. So the only way to get it down, that's automation, or that is to use very cheap substrates. So I think that also has to do with the kind of insect that you want to rear. I'm not quite sure, because if you look at worldwide at the insect species that are reared, it is not very many. It are mealworms, it's crickets, it is locusts, black soldier fly, maybe housefly, but that's about it. And I think we have about 2,000 different species, and maybe there are others which could be used. So that's another thing which maybe needs some attention in the future. And what I mentioned, the developments are going very fast if you look at the number of publications that appear each year. I think that's all I can say about a species suitable for farming. Of course, if you look at automation, if you have trays or you have cages or whatever, also that is quick. That's really a development process. I just want to mention Protix, a company that I know from the beginning. Those two boys, they came to my office about 10 years ago, or maybe 12 years ago now, and they were working for another organization, nothing to do with insects. And they were asking me whether they should shift to insects as food and feed. They did. And now they have almost a multinational company. They received last year, I think about 45 million euros. They opened last year a huge factory. And at a certain moment, I think that was about 4 or 5 years ago, they showed me to a large facility. And that facility was their graveyard, they called it. And the graveyard was just discarded equipment. I could not believe it. The whole hall was full of discarded equipment. So also that those companies are extremely secretive, I can understand, because they have put so much effort in innovation that they want to keep that to themselves. But just to indicate that it is mainly something that the companies are doing in order to produce things more effectively, and they don't share that with others. That's something we have to take into account. Okay. How can you evaluate the problems that you have farming that insect yield, growth cycle, etc.? And how can you address and improve, or are characteristics inherent for that species? Well, most of those issues can be addressed, like use of substrates, automation processes, strains. I think not many people are working on strains. I know that Protix, they work with a genetic company in order to look at the black soldier fly. I think the particular strain they have, if they can improve it. But there are, I think I only know of one publication which deals with genetic improvement. There are a few publications on mealworms and black soldier fly that deal with strains, but I think that's an important issue because of the fast development of insects, the short development cycle. It's much easier to select for good strains with insects than for the other production animals. So I think that's a thing to work on. Of course, the substrate, I think, is important. I mentioned that already. And of course, all kind of abiotic conditions, which can also improve things, like even the use of light, increasing some vitamins in the insect. All those things, I think, are quite important. So yeah, a lot of people are working on all of those issues.
Okay, thank you. We've got some questions from both David Allen and David Moss, most of which are more around policy and wider developments through the sector. So we can probably take those together. David Allen is joining us, I think, from Myanmar, and is researching existing national species and cultural practices in the food sector, aiming to assist the food and feed sector. And David Moss is interested in potential involvement in insect farming as part of the circular economy. So maybe we can take those sets of questions together, and then after that we'll come back to the chat screen.
Yeah, I think I met Ellen last year in Germany. Yes, well, it's about legislation. What I mentioned already, we have still problems that insects are not allowed to be fed on manure and on catering waste. On manure, I think it is something which I think is a real challenge. I know IPIF didn't want to talk about insects reared on manure, and even Protix didn't want to talk about it, but although I know they have favorable results on this. But you know, in the Netherlands we have a huge problem with nitrogen emissions. Even whole construction projects have to be stopped because of ammonia emissions. That was legislative enforced. So everybody is now looking at how can we get down on those ammonia emissions. And one of the main problems is manure. So if we can use insects for that, I think that is a real challenge. So I think worldwide, I think that needs really some attention. And of course, everybody is then asking, what about manure? What about contamination of the manure? What I understood is that manure is rather safe to be used. So it is maybe, I think IPIF and Protix were more afraid of the public reaction than of something else. It was not really because of rationality, but because of emotions. Well, that often happens. I think if you ask me what is important to bring these things forward, it is just IPIF. I think IPIF is the most important organization, I think worldwide, who are addressing these issues, and they are doing a very good job. So I think it's a question of lobbying at the European Union. So that's all I can say. It's really a matter of lobbying, and that's what IPIF is doing. Now, if you ask me about the alternative proteins, yes, and how insects relate to those alternative proteins. Of course, we have plant-based proteins. I think that's going well, and that is sold and already on the market. So if you look at macroalgae in the seaweeds, I think that's going as well, but not yet very much. Microalgae is still in development. I think one of the most interesting developments maybe, that is the cultured meat. If you look at cultured meat in 2013, one burger, costed $280,000. That was presented in London, as far as I remember. They're now down to $10. So that's going quick, and I think very interesting. So there are several companies like Mosa Meat and Spanish-based biotech foods, which have really got the price down. I think there are still quite some technological issues to be solved, and also maybe about consumer attitudes, because consumers are a bit resistant to eat lab-based meat. But I think that is a development which may go also very quickly. But I don't think it is a competition to insects. I think there is room enough for everybody. If you look at if you just look at the feed market, we are talking about $1 billion more or less. So that's a huge market, and especially if it would be allowed for pigs and poultry, I think there is enough room for everybody. So I don't see that really as a matter of competition. They're also being developed, and I think that's fine. That's okay. That was the questions from Alan.
Okay, thank you. And if anyone does want to respond, incidentally, if your questions have been answered, then put up your hand or give a shout or whatever, feel free. But otherwise, we've got some questions here from David Moss as well. Probably follow on quite nicely from those.
There was some questions from Davis still, Davis Moss.
Yeah, oh, I'm not, were those, did you get those? I can read them out. The first one is, how does the cost of insect protein for animal feed from mealworms or black soldier fly larvae compare to the cost of current mainstream protein sources such as soy and fish meal?
Yeah, well, I think they're still too expensive. But the other question is, I think nutritionally they're equivalent. Environmentally, I think they're better. Well, maybe not to soy, but fish meal. I think fish meal is something which is phased out just because of over-exploitation of the oceans, and also because of environmental reasons, because it's a byproduct from marine fishing. So I think environmentally it's okay, and it just depends how much emphasis will be given to environmental issues, and if sustainable products will get a bonus in one or the other way, or that maybe the others are taxed, and then let's say insects become more interesting. So that's something which I don't know, but currently I think the costs of those insect products are still too expensive. Or anyway, more expensive, let me put it that way, than plant-based products. Subsidizing, I don't know. You always have to be careful with subsidizing an insect industry, I think. If you look at the number of investments in Europe only, and that was a calculation by IPIF, most companies got about 600 million euros on investments up till 2019. So that's quite a lot. Some people question why big companies are not joining in yet, like Unilever or Mars, or name those big companies. Well, one big company once told me, as soon as they see that we make a profit, they will just buy us out. And well, that may be the case. So maybe it's still too early. But if they are really making a profit, and they need those investments, absolutely, because it's completely new industry. I told you about the trial and error and all the innovations that cost money. So if I ask those companies if they can stand on their own feet, whether they make a profit, I get evasive answers. So I just don't know. Maybe they can, but without the innovation, they certainly cannot. And that innovation is absolutely necessary. So, but subsidizing, I don't know. If I look at the Dutch government, they are supportive and they help the industry wherever they can. I think in Belgium it's the same. Assistance, especially for legislative issues or lobbying in the European Union, those kind of things, yes, their governments can be quite important. Most impressive success stories from in the insect farming world. Well, I mentioned Protix already. That's an absolute success story. Of course, we all know about Agri-Protein. They received also, well, more than $100 million over the years. And the company Insect in France is also a company that received well, more than 100 million euros in order to proceed. And of course, there are a huge number of startups, but some start and some fail. You see that happening. Sometimes there was one company in the Netherlands that was working on crickets, and that company received a large order from Switzerland. So the guy, he hired a new personnel and was expanding, and then he needed an export permit from the Dutch government, and that took 1 year, and meanwhile the guy got broke. So I think people shouldn't underestimate the legislative problems if you have a startup with insects, and you better join companies like Protix who can help you with this.
Okay, thank you. We've got a few questions in the chat, some of them in the public chat and some of them have just come to me. Maybe we start from Willem Flinterman. Hi, good to see you there. In fact, you've got your microphone. Did you want to go ahead yourself?
Yeah, I was wondering, because I read, and this relates to the use of or application of insects in waste remediation or processing. I read some articles concerning mealworms, the capability of mealworms to digest and metabolize plastics or synthetical polymers.
Yeah.
And these articles, I think, are already a few years old. I read the Chinese research, and I was wondering what the current status of that is, of that field of research, and what, in your view, the applications could be.
I'm not too optimistic. What they can, well, apparently what happens is that mealworms are a storage problem. In storage, you have often plastic bags.
Yeah.
So the insects, in one or the other way, was able to chew through the plastic.
Yeah.
Apparently also those mealworms have gut bacteria which are able to digest that plastic.
Yeah.
However, I think they can survive in one or the other way. They can survive, but they cannot really digest it. So the digestion is really an issue. So if they can convert bioplastics into body weight, I doubt it.
Okay.
That's what I understood. And it's not really plastic, it's polystyrene.
Yeah, but there was also another research that I came across where they did an experiment with polyethylene, and the results were quite similar to the research that was done on polystyrene.
Yeah, I checked it lately. I think the people were more interested in looking at those gut bacteria, the mealworms, in order to use those for maybe degradation than to use the mealworm itself.
Is there a journal where these research get published more than somewhere else?
I can't remember where it was published, those studies. I can look it up, but I don't know. There are I think about 4 or 5 articles about this.
Okay. Yeah.
As far as I know. And if you send me a mail, I can send that to you.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
I think you had a more general question there as well, just about what are the leading journals in entomology.
Yeah. What are the leading scientific journals today in your field, besides, of course, the journal that you're editing?
Well, there are quite a number of journals, I must say. It's PLOS ONE, where you find several articles, but it's also journals that deal with waste conversion. Can't remember the names directly, but or frontiers in insect science. Well, it's quite a variety of different journals. Yeah, but indeed, we sometimes, if we look at the amount of articles that we get for the Journal of Insects as Food and Feed, it's very heterogeneous. So it goes from rearing the insects up to the genome of some insect species. So yeah, an enormous variety, microbiology, you name it.
Yeah. Thank you.
I know that David Allen has raised his hand. Is this following straight on from that? There's another couple of questions in the chat. Oh, sorry, we can't hear you. I've got a couple of other questions in the chat. So if you want, if your microphone doesn't seem to be working, then if you want to just type something into the chat, and we'll take it from there. I've got a couple of questions from Peter and Jennifer, who I believe are the owners of a cricket farm in Aberdeenshire in Scotland, and they've asked when, although you are welcome to ask yourself actually as well, although I can read this out. When breeding large colonies of insects, particularly crickets, is it better to keep a closed group colony or buy in new genetics from other farms?
Oh, there's a good one. It's very dangerous to well, if you start completely new, I mean, it's interesting to check first maybe the different strains of crickets that you want to use and test those maybe. But if you have an existing colony, then to use or to bring in new material can be quite dangerous. Because if you rear insects, you get, well, you get of course an adaptation to your rearing conditions. And if you bring something from outside, you may bring in elements which you don't like, so what I understood always that it is quite dangerous to bring in new material. Some people say, well, you need to enlarge your genetic stock, but I don't know. I know we had once a rearing of the Colorado potato beetle. And I know that the Colorado potato beetle at a certain moment, our strain, did not resemble in any way that was what in the field. So if you have a certain strain of crickets which performs quite well, I think you have to be careful. And I would do that on an experimental base, not use your whole stock or mix your whole stock with it, but maybe do it on a trial base. To bring in new material. But I think you have to be very careful with this. But we don't know very much about the genetics of insects.
Okay, thanks. And there was a follow-up from Peter and Jennifer as well, which was, are there, excuse me, are there optimal levels or percentages of fiber and oil in the feed diet for crickets?
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, sure. Are there optimal levels or percentages of fiber and oil in the feed diet for crickets?
You mean if you have insects, whether there are what the levels of chitin are if you feed those to animals, something like that? Do I understand that correctly?
Peter and Jennifer, if you're listening just now, do you want to pop your microphone on and just follow up on that?
Yeah, hello. I was just wondering, you know, on the diet that I make up for the crickets, because I actually work as a nutritionist on beef and sheep feed. You know, is there an optimum level of fiber and oil, you know, as a total percentage of the diet itself? Because the yields vary quite a lot if you differentiate between, say, 4% oil in the diet and 10, and obviously 10% fiber and 25. There's different results from different quantities.
Oh, yeah, it's well, if you talk about fibers, it depends a little bit on, I think, the substrate that you are using, and let's say you can influence the insect nutritional value by your substrate. That's possible. But not so much the protein content. The protein content always remains quite stable. But you can influence the oil content or the fatty acid content of the insect by working with the substrate. Concerning the fiber, I don't know really, but there are examples, of course. If you rear, let's say, the black soldier fly, you can rear them on straw. That's possible. And that, of course, has an enormous high fiber content. But normally, and I think that's also a new development, you try to use microbes or fungi or bacteria in order to ferment first the product before you feed it to the insect. And that is something that can help. So you may, there are several publications which indicated that very high fiber substrates can be used by insects if you use microbes first, or that you influence, well, if you look at the black soldier fly is able to sow more or less the substrates on, or the microbes on the substrate in order to digest it and make it fit for digestion. So that's a very interesting, let's say, interplay between the substrate and the gut bacteria of the insect. And I think with mealworms also they have done some experiments on this. So there it is often an interplay between microbes and the insect, the gut bacteria of the insect.
Okay, thank you. David Allen has posted a few things here. He's given us a link to an article about the Zophobus atratus superworm, and the article suggests that they can digest polystyrene at 4 times the rate of mealworms. So this goes back to the earlier questions about mealworms and plastic. So the question that he wanted to ask to follow on from the earlier questions was, if the worms did eat plastic, what could they be used for subsequently? So what, do they have a subsequent use, or would that just be eating plastic?
Yeah, I think there are several superworms, and we are talking by the Polystrain, by plastic-eating superworms. Well, it is a bit double, but I think they talk about biodegradation and mineralization. They're not talking about biotransformation. So I think you have to be careful here. They may eat plastic, but it does not mean that it is a real, let's say, biotransformation of the product. So I don't know.
Okay, thank you. That's a really useful distinction, I think, to make, apart from anything else. We have a couple more questions, and I think that will probably take us pretty much to time. So if anyone does have maybe one more question that they want to submit, then probably best to do that now, just so we can see what's coming in. Another one from Pablo, which is from the 2,000 edible insect species. Does each one of those have the potential to be farmed? And I guess that goes back to what you were saying earlier about how the very small variety of species that actually is farmed at the moment. And can we look beyond that? Is there scope, do you think?
Well, no, they cannot be farmed, all of them. But if you look at, there are efforts underway to farm some of the interesting species, like palm beetles. There are investigations going on whether it's possible to farm them. If you look at caterpillars, there are quite a number of caterpillars in Africa which are eaten, and they're very popular. Take the Mopane caterpillar. For the Mopane caterpillar, there has been a large study, I think was paid by DFID, as far as I remember. That is a publication by Gazul quite some time ago, and they tried to rear the insect, but it was almost impossible due to parasitoids, due to diseases. They were not able to farm them. I also know of some projects in the Central African Republic where they use some insects and they rear them on well, like the silkworm on mulberry. So there are some probably caterpillar species that can be reared. But I remember when I was at FAO that they were asking me that some of those caterpillar species are extremely popular in Africa, and whether they could be farmed like the silkworm on the mulberry. Because now they have to go into the forest and collect them, and it is a seasonal product. So of course it would be very beneficial if they would be available the whole year round, or that you can rear some of the host species around the village, something like that. I wrote even a project for this, but I never got it. But anyway, I think there are more species. If you look at flies, of course we work now with the black soldier fly and with the house fly, but there are other fly species which can do probably the same. But no, there are very few people really working on this. So I think there are more species, but well, it's not really a large investigation on this. If you take the bamboo caterpillar in Asia, I think it's very popular. There are some, what I would say, domestication techniques in order to rear them. You don't have to cut whole bamboo stems in order to harvest them. So they have some methods, but I call that more semi-domestication, to rear them in higher quantities. But it is not really an artificial diet or putting them a year long through a process. So the mass rearing of those species, well, needs probably some more attention. I also know from the she caterpillar in West Africa, it has also been tried to rear them on artificial diet. They did not succeed. There is another grasshopper species in East Africa called Nezene. That's a Ruspolia species. I think they are also in the process of rearing them. So worldwide, there are efforts going on rearing some of the other quite popular species.
Okay, we do have a few more questions. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to get through them all, but we'll try a couple anyway. First one from Carlotta. Is there any example of rearing mix between Akita and Sigillatus? Is it possible to rear them together? And then from Peter and Jennifer, has there been any research in feeding live or dead yeast to insects, and is there any benefit?
Well, rearing those cricket species together, I do not see really a benefit of doing this. I think you better rear them separately. I have no idea why you would rear them together, because they all have specific needs. And I think keeping them separately would, I think, be more logical than to rear them together, because they have different types of requirements. And the other problem, I think, mostly you have to keep your production unit separately from your reproduction unit. The reproduction unit you have in order to harvest the eggs, and the eggs you sow on the substrate. If you get a problem in your production unit, of course you can harvest again from the reproduction unit. So you have to keep those things separately. And I think it would be more logical if you have two species also to keep those separately. The reproduction unit, by the way, should be very much isolated, very hygienic, without any possibility of getting a disease into it. Because I've seen companies that had to fire people because they were losing really their whole colony because of a disease which suddenly came in. And then if you try to identify it, it's almost impossible to find out what causes the problem. And you have to start all over from scratch. So.
And maybe just very briefly, has there been any research into feeding live or dead yeast to insects? And is there?
I have no idea. Sorry, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
That's a good quick answer. There is one final question actually, which might also be a quick answer. So let's have just a quick look at it. And this will be the last one from Massimo, who asks, which out of crickets and mealworms has more chances in food?
Say that again, which?
Mealworms as food is cheaper than crickets as food. And this might be the reason for the adoption in a number of packaged products in Europe. But in the rest of the world, startups, they'll still think that crickets is the way to go, probably for consumer acceptance reasons.
Yeah,
so, which?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Honestly, if you give me mealworms or crickets, I like crickets much more than mealworms, just because of the taste. But mealworms are probably easier. I think they're cheaper anyway, if you rear those, than crickets. But, well, if you look at all those bars, which you have, protein bars, they're mainly made from crickets. There are a few which have mealworms, I know. And in the bars, what I normally see is that they put other flavors like cocoa or chocolate or raspberries or whatever, ginger. So I think you often don't taste the insect anymore, but you taste only the products which they put into it. So there it may not matter so much what kind of insect you use. But so it depends maybe also on the purpose. But crickets, as far as I can see, it's about 40 euro per kilogram, something like that. Maybe it's cheaper now, but it's still quite a lot of money. And if mealworms can be cheaper, well, it depends on the kind of product you will put it in. But well, crickets may be also more appealing to people than mealworms. Mealworms still get the idea of a maggot, which people don't like. So, or worms, you know, even the word worm is, I think, not very nice. But so it may be also what appeals more to the public.
Okay, well, I realise that we've gone very slightly past 2 o'clock, so we probably better draw things to a close there. But first of all, thanks very much indeed to Arnold for giving up his time to speak to us just now. And I think we've kept you very busy. You've just taken about 45 minutes of questions, so thank you, and very wide-ranging questions as well. So thank you very much for dealing with them so thoroughly. Thank you to everyone who has, everyone else who's participated just now as well. I suppose if we were doing this in more conventional circumstances and we were sitting in a room, we would all give a round of applause to Arnold just now to say thank you to him. But I'm sure we can do that. There we go. We have virtual applause.
Okay.
It may be silent, but it's well intentioned. So thank you to everyone. Before we do just close just now, I did want to highlight that this is the first in a new series of webinars that Woven is organising. The next one is going to be on the 16th of October, so put that date in your diary. And the speaker next time is going to be Robert Nathan Allen, who is the founder and director of Little Herds in Austin in Texas, and he is also the director of the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture. So hopefully again we can learn from some of these international comparisons and international experiences and help to develop these international networks as well, hopefully, in conversations. And of course I would encourage anyone who hasn't already done this to become a member of Woven, which will help support these sorts of activities in the future, along with wider conversations and such like, and also provides a discount on events such as this. So do go to the Woven website and consider membership if you haven't done that already. So, so I'll draw things to a close there. Thank you very much again to everyone for coming along, and I hope you found that useful.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.